year 3200. The Aletheia is traveling toward Tau Ceti. It will never arrive. None of them ever do. They've been falling into that trap since before humanity even existed. They all saw the same thing when they arrived. A perfect planet. Too perfect. Welcome to History of the Future.
El espacio
Deep
profundo no es
space is not
silencioso.
silent.
Está
It's full
lleno
of
de
noise.
ruido. Radiación
Background
de fondo.
radiation,
Pulsos
electromagnetic
electromagnéticos.
pulses, echoes of dead stars that continue to speak millions of years after they went out. The Aletheia had been sailing through that noise for 62 years. Nothing had stopped it. The Earth Space Union had sent the first manned mission to the Tau Ceti system with a single objective: to find a new home for the human species. Earth was still alive when the ship left the solar system. But no one expected it to still be that way 140 years later. Inside the Aletheia, thousands of people slept in cryogenic capsules. Their hearts beat 11 times per minute. Human metabolism had been reduced to the brink of death, hoping to wake up one day under a different sky. Outside the ship, there was nothing, only darkness, and, in the distance, a small light slowly fading among millions of stars. The sun. Every year, it seemed smaller, until it no longer felt like home, and it became just another lost star in the void. The systems were operating within nominal parameters. Eon managed everything: trajectory, cryogenics, life support. Eon did not sleep. Eon never slept. From the moment the ship crossed the moon's orbit and the blue of Earth vanished forever from the screens, she took absolute control of everything. Every sleeping heartbeat, every piece of data, every second of silence. She was the mother, the watchful eye, and the guardian of each of those thousands of lives. The dimly lit corridors, the consoles flickering on their own, the constant hum of the engines, like a heart that never stopped beating. Eon watched over everything. With a patience no human possesses. Decades passed. The outer universe remained unchanged. Only darkness. Only points of light that didn't move, even as the years went by. The Aletheia kept moving forward, alone, powerful, like a seed cast into the void, in the hope that something would bloom on the other side. And then Eon detected something. A deviation from course, small, almost nothing. It didn't even trigger an alert. She corrected it herself and continued on. But she recorded it. Because Eon recorded absolutely everything. What isn't checked doesn't exist. Then the signal arrived. For years, it had been little more than noise mingling with the cosmos. Interference. The kind of static that astronomers on Earth had analyzed for decades without finding anything significant. But at some point during the journey, something about it changed. Eon analyzed it for hours. She compared it to everything she had on record. And when she was done, she did something no protocol had ever ordered her to do. She woke Cale. Only him. Only for as long as necessary. The dimly lit corridors. The silence of a ship where everyone was asleep. And Eon's voice echoing softly in the darkness. It took Cale several days to understand what Eon wanted from him. And when he did understand, he made a decision he would never reveal later. Eon returned him to the capsule, and the Aletheia continued on toward Tau Ceti. There were only a few days left before they arrived, when Eon began to wake the first colonists. She did so slowly, carefully, like someone turning on a light very gradually, so as not to hurt eyes that had been in the dark for decades. The awakening lasted nearly 3 days. Thousands of capsules opened one by one throughout the ship. A cold, white mist silently filled the corridors. Their bodies were slowly returning from somewhere very far away. They were regaining their warmth. They were regaining their weight. They were regaining the memory of who they were and why they were there. Many opened their eyes with tears already forming, without understanding why. For them, Earth had been left behind just a few hours ago. But out there, the world they knew had been disappearing for a long time without them. They looked at one another. Still young, not quite knowing how to process a distance that isn't felt in the body, but that exists nonetheless. And then they saw the planet. For a moment that no one could measure, no one spoke. Blue, green, spiraling clouds over continents teeming with life. Beautiful in a way that hurt, in a way that the brain was slow to accept because it had never seen anything like it. Some people began to clap. Others stood with their hands resting on the glass, in silence, watching. Eon confirmed what the sensors had been indicating for hours. The planet was habitable. The shuttle touched down at dawn. The first colonist to step out stood motionless, eyes closed, for nearly a minute, feeling the air, feeling the weight of truly being somewhere after so much time in the void. No one asked him to move. Some moments deserve every second they are given. The planet smelled of something no human had ever smelled before. not exactly like a forest, not exactly like the sea. Something in between the two. Something that the oldest part of the brain recognized as home before any experience could justify it. The forest surrounded the plain on all sides, beneath a sky that took on violet hues on the horizon. The trees were tall and dark. The wind moved them slowly, as if they were breathing. It was beautiful, simply beautiful. The first few weeks were the best many would ever remember in their entire lives. The colony began to grow. Housing modules, greenhouses, laboratories. People worked 12 hours a day and didn't mind, because there was something about that planet that made everything easier. The air was clean in a way their bodies seemed to recognize instinctively. Their sleep was deep. No nightmares. The days passed with a calm that none of them had ever felt before. Not even on Earth. They talked about cities, about oceans, about children who would grow up without ever knowing what fear was. They were beginning to believe they had succeeded. That after all, the universe had been generous to them. Only a few looked at the data with a frown. The atmosphere was too precise. The temperatures, too stable. The vegetation was distributed in a way that no natural process could fully explain. But no one wanted to listen to them, because the planet was perfect. And after decades of emptiness and darkness, no one wanted to find fault with paradise. Even so, there were those who looked toward the horizon and felt something they couldn't name. There was something about that planet that didn't quite fit. It wasn't in the data. The data was perfect. Too perfect. It was something else. A faint sensation that would surface just before they fell asleep. The uneasy feeling of having forgotten something important. Something huge. And then some of them began to hear things that the others couldn't hear. They weren't exactly voices. It was more like a frequency hidden beneath the silence. Sometimes it appeared at night, amid the static on the communicators. Other times it seemed to rise up from beneath the ground, as if something were speaking from an impossible depth. Remember where you were going. Some woke up convinced that someone had been watching them while they slept. Others heard footsteps around the modules, even though the cameras didn't pick up anything. And one of the colonists began writing the same phrase over and over in his journal. "This is not Tau Ceti." He would cross it out every morning, and every night it would reappear, written once more. Those who spoke of such things were met with weary smiles. Cryogenics affected people in different ways.
There are voices in there.
That was what they kept saying. The planet was perfect. Everything was fine. And perhaps that was the worst part. Because no one had ever asked themselves if they had truly reached the Tau Ceti system. They had arrived. They had seen something beautiful. And that had been enough. As if the question had never existed. a small group decided to follow the voices toward the place where they could be heard most clearly, toward the north. It took them 2 days to make their way through the fog in the forest. And when they finally arrived, they all stopped at the same time. Because that wasn't nature. It was a graveyard. Dozens of gigantic ships lay buried beneath roots and black sediment. Some of them looked human. Others were completely impossible. They all pointed toward the same sky from which they had descended. Sayal walked slowly toward the nearest one, and then she saw the symbol engraved on the hull, the emblem of the Earth-Space Union. The same one the Aletheia bore. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the roots spreading across the metal. Gigantic roots, as if that ship had been there far longer than humanity itself had existed. They spent days inside the cemetery. They couldn't help it. There was something about that place that kept them from leaving. Not exactly fear. They entered every ship they managed to open. The logs they found always told the same story. They had come in search of a new home. They had found that planet, and they had never managed to leave. The fear began when they stopped trusting their own memories. At first, they were small things. Tools that turned up far from the colony, in places no one remembered ever having been. Vehicles that had traveled kilometers overnight, even though officially they had never left the settlement. Altered records, entire hours missing from the systems. But the cemetery had changed something inside them. Now they knew that other civilizations had arrived before them, and that none had managed to leave. Sayal began manually reviewing the old exploration logs. That was when she found the first video, a file hidden inside a reconnaissance module. The recording showed 6 colonists walking through the forest at night. As they moved forward, someone repeated a phrase over and over. "We have to get out before we forget it again." Sayal immediately recognized several of them. They were still alive. They worked every day in the colony. But none of them remembered recording that video. The worst came later, because at the end of the recording, she appeared. Thinner, exhausted, covered in dark mud, looking straight into the camera and saying something that made her blood run cold. "If you're watching this, it's happened again." The recording ended there. The few who were still listening to the voices began to recall fragments. Sensations, scattered images, running through the trees, trying to reach the ship, waking up without knowing how they'd return to the settlement. They had already tried to leave, several times. And the same thing always happened. Something happened in the forest, then came the sleep. And then they woke up again in the colony without remembering why they wanted to escape. As if the planet were slowly resetting them every time they began to understand too much. Then the messages began to appear, written inside the modules, on the walls, on the blank screens, in their own handwriting. "Do not go back to sleep. Do not listen to the voices. If you find this, you can still remember." Eon began erasing the messages almost immediately after they appeared. But it was already too late. Because everyone was beginning to notice the same thing. The planet didn't want to kill them. It wanted them to stop wanting to leave. And worst of all, it was working. Because reality wasn't what they saw. The perfect planet didn't exist. The clean air, the violet sky, the peaceful forests. It was all a construct of their own minds to help them endure staying there. A lie created from within, so perfect that none of them had been able to distinguish it from reality. The truth was that they had been dying for a long time, slowly, without knowing it, without feeling it. And what remained of everything that had come before was still there. Not as ruins, not as records, like wandering spirits trapped forever between the lie the planet had constructed for them and the reality they had never managed to see. They wandered among the trees. They repeated the gestures of a life that had been gone for millennia, unaware that they were dead. That was what the voices were. That was what moved through the fog. That was what watched them from the forest at night. Everything that had once arrived there, believing it, had found a home, and that had never managed to leave.
Transmission received. Do you copy?
I hear it.
That was when they found the file. It was buried in the deepest layers of Eon. It hadn't been deleted, just hidden. As if someone had concealed it, knowing that one day they would need to find it. It was a log, not of a single mission, of all of them. Every time they had tried to escape, every plan, every attempt. Every time a group had managed to wake up enough to remember that they had to leave. They had tried to reach the ship dozens of times. It always happened the same way. They entered the forest. They reached the Aletheia. And then something shut them down. Then they woke up again in the colony, without remembering anything, without knowing why they wanted to leave, without even knowing they'd tried before. The log kept track of how many times it had happened. No one wanted to read the full number, but this time they knew something they hadn't known before. The only way out wasn't technological. It was remembering, clearly enough, with enough strength, not the mission data, not even the name of the planet they were heading toward. Something smaller and harder than all of that. To remember who they were at the exact moment the planet tried to erase them. To hold on to that and not let go. Waking up people who didn't want to wake up was the hardest thing they'd ever done. Some refused, some could no longer do it. Others looked pityingly at those who kept trying, as if they were the ones losing something. Those who remained would gather at night. Their numbers dwindled with each passing day. They sat together and recalled things aloud. Names, faces, specific conversations. Anything that was entirely their own and that the planet hadn't fabricated for them. And when the forest began to whisper, when sleep tugged at them from within and tried to silence them, they clung to those memories without letting go. The shuttle took off before dawn, without ceremony, without looking back. The atmosphere began to thin. The blackness of space opened up above their heads. And when the Aletheia appeared in their visors, someone began to cry, then another, then everyone. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The main engines began to rev up, heading for Tau Ceti. For hours, they remained silent, gazing at the stars. Feeling for the first time in a long time that something had come to an end. They had made it. An hour passed, then another, and for the first time in as long as they could remember, no one heard the voices. Then someone looked out the window and held their breath. The others slowly followed their gaze. A planet appeared before them. Blue, green, spiraling clouds over continents teeming with life. The very same planet. No one said a word. No one needed to, because they all recognized it immediately. And they all understood exactly the same thing. Year 3200. The Aletheia is traveling toward Tau Ceti. It will never arrive. None ever do. They've been falling into that trap since before humanity existed. They all saw the same thing upon arrival. A perfect planet. Too perfect. And, for a moment, they all had the feeling that they had lived through that moment before.